She's been out of the spotlight for a while, but now former Charleston County School Board chairwoman Liz Alston is back to talk about politics, education, the Charleston County School Board, and more in this edition of Quintin Reports. Liz Alston, you've been out of the spotlight for a while now. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Being out of the spotlight has been great.
Well, for those who don't already know, who's Liz Alston?
Well, I've worn many hats. I think most people remember me as the chairman of the Charleston County School Board or as an historian, or most people remember me as a high school principal at St. John's, or a lot of people remember me as an ethnic studies historian writing history. Most people also affiliate me with the City of Charleston and tourism. As chairman of the Tourism Commission for the City of Charleston, one of our duties is overseeing the carriages and tourism in general. We deal with all of the aspects of the city, including the part that I like better is writing the Black History Notes for the tour guide manual. So that's just a bit into my life.
Well, take me back to the time when you were growing up in Jedburgh. What was that like?
Oh, that was really great. I was there Sunday. My mother, Sadie Hunt, was matriarch of a family. She lived to be 99, just died about 2 years ago. And I think Elsa McDowell did a piece. And I had a carefree childhood. You know, my mother was a homemaker. My father worked at the Charleston Naval Shipyard. You know, we had to go to church every Sunday. And as some of my articles would say, one of the things that I remember about going to church, not looking back, not chewing gum in public, you know, getting out the car right, those kinds of things, a sense of family.
Not going to the grocery store at 2 in the morning.
And always a fitness guru, you know, eating the correct foods, exercising, walking. And, I have another passion that I did not mention, and that's dragon boating, which a lot of people don't know about, is that on Tuesdays and Thursdays during sea snow months, there are a group of us cancer survivors. We get into a boat of about 20 people, the dragon boat, and we paddle. And over the past 5 years, we have held and won competitions. You look behind that door, you see the medals that we won in Canada, Orlando, Atlanta, Tampa, Canada. You just name it, and we are doing that. So those are some of the things that I've been affiliated with and still affiliated with to a degree.
So tell me, what have you been doing now that you have left the Charleston County School Board?
Well, a lot of consultant work. I was just talking about traveling around the country, running my mouth, getting invited to be keynote speakers at various conferences. And it doesn't matter if it's a neighborhood conference, if it's a national trust conference, educational conferences are somewhat in the past. But like mitigating committees that people would like when they come to Charleston, they do their research like you have done, and they find people that serve on committees, because most people would like for me to serve on their committees because I have a tendency to speak up a little bit.
Yes.
And in addition to I used to be a tour guide at Middleton Place. I still serve on the board of Drayton Hall Site Council. And in addition to that, the mayor and Congressman Clyburn and a group of 23 other Charlestonians, we have the African American Museum. And so that is coming. So those are a lot of grassroots activities that we are very much involved in. And it takes a lot of time. As a matter of fact, I find it very difficult to remember when I had time to work, because a community is very important.
Yes.
I believe it takes a village to raise a child, and so, I have grandchildren, so I spend a lot of time with Kiera and Naya and Somerville helping to raise them.
Do you miss being out of the spotlight?
Like I said, not at all. I'm just out of the camera view. but very active in community. And a lot of people ask me, and they are dying for me to run for some office, but
Do you want to?
Not really, because I enjoy the work that I'm doing, and I feel that not everyone has to be in the spotlight to achieve. And I suppose it isn't something that I've yearned for, because as a public official, as an educator, you know, as a person who have always worked in the community, that is, and then I've found out that there are so many people that make such valuable contributions that no one knows about.
Yes.
And I was reading something in the paper yesterday. It's that the neighbor that helps you, you know, the person who helps you across the street, the person who cooks you a dinner, or the various caregivers. And I feel that not all of the people have to be in the spotlight to make a contribution. And having lived on both sides of the spectrum, I find this life very comforting.
Really?
Very much so.
Now, I know you were elected to the Charleston County School Board in 1994
Correct.
and 98.
And correct. Oh, my goodness, that is correct.
What was your secret to winning those elections?
Well, I think I've thought about that. That isn't a question that I have not thought about.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of persons who felt that my being controversial, because when I was a high school principal, I stayed in the news. So I think that most people were concerned about me because I was always being attacked, which I didn't mind. They felt that it did. And being the underdog sometimes helps out, because while I was being attacked by that group, I would come to my door, there would be flowers, there would be cards, there would be calls. So I found that that was a part, and then I went to many community groups and discussions. And my outspokenness sometimes went against the grain. But in the end, it's just like, not that I'm comparing myself to Joe Riley, because in working in a few campaigns, and a lot of people who said, I'm mad at Joe, but I'm going to vote for him. So they say, I'm mad at Liz, but I'll vote for her. So I think it's something about a person being, not throwing the baby out with the dishwater, but standing up with butterflies in your stomach, and you go for the goal. My mother and a lot of people will say, whatever you do, Liz, you know, you follow your gut feeling. And so whether or not it was popular, whether or not people would say, oh, you can't do that, Liz. I remember as a high school principal, a lot of my co-principals and co-workers, colleagues, would say, Liz, you can't do that. But many of those principals, and we were high school principals, ate the stress. The Lord may take me away tonight, but they have all transitioned out of this world into another one. So you got to stand up for what you believe in, go against the grain, treat everybody right, and do the best you can. And so that is really my philosophy. So I'm saying, well, I may not get one vote, but this is my stand, and I will stand by what I believe in, come hell or high water.
Chairwoman of the Charleston County School Board.
Wow.
What was that like?
That, to most people, would have been difficult, but it wasn't difficult for me. And a lot of my colleagues would say, oh, that's terrible. How can you stand it? But a lot of people didn't realize that I was a teacher for 8 years before I became a central staff person. And as a matter of fact, I had 11 jobs with the Charleston County School District, a teacher, a director, a coordinator, a principal, assistant principal, director. So I remember my friend Diane would always define our positions as being incestuous, because I knew everybody. So when I would go to a group, I knew all the teachers, I knew all the principals, I knew the community people, I knew the preservation group, because I'm a preservationist. So by being in so many groups, that every group that I appeared in were people that was a part of my past. So a blast from the past, sometimes we would say. So by being controversial, for lack of a better word, by being always in a lead position, I found being the chairperson of the Charleston County School Board, it was just familiar territory. Everybody knew that I would read those big books and knew the answer. One thing I've learned, never ask a question unless you knew the answer. So I would stay up all night, read all of those difficult books.
Yes.
And even before I went to college, when I went to college, I remember Dr. Mose would say, my first day in class, being a freshman from a rural part of South Carolina, first one raised my hand, and he said, you know, you're just as wrong as you can be, but you're logical. So not being afraid to speak up and tackling difficult issues is something that an educator, and I could be wrong because I'm highly opinionated, probably biased, not bigoted or something like that. But I don't say that all persons should be on a school board, should be educators, but I think the majority of them should be. And I would challenge all of the people that, and I listen, I just don't say anything, but many of these people are making decisions about things they knew nothing about. Many of them are, and I suppose being elected to office, I look at the criteria. Maybe being not an educator is not important. Of course, I think it is. Then, in addition to that, there are a lot of people around the country, because I served on state school boards, the federal network around the country, probably networking with school board members across the country. There are a lot of school board persons who run for the school board simply to keep taxes down. They put their children in public school. Of course, if Liz Alston had anything to do about it, I would dare elect anyone who would send your child to a public school, to a private school,
Sure.
And then you're making decisions for that. I know this is a democracy and everybody has the right to say what they believe in, but that's what I believe in. Case closed.
Speaking of controversy, take me back to the Chip Zellinger era at 75 Calhoun Street. What was it like during those dark days? How did you overcome that?
Well, as a matter of fact, I think facts speak for themselves. I have followed Chip Zellinger around the country. The same mistakes that he made here, he made in Colorado, he made in Manassas, Virginia. I get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I read most of the newspapers around the country, and I know how to Google, know how to Zebra search.
Yeah.
And I found out that it goes back to, and Chip Zellinger was one of the people who said, your gut feeling. Follow your gut feeling.
Oh.
And even though that was a time when there were 5 members of the Charleston County School Board who were African Americans, and I really think, and I can probably be lambasted for this statement as well, I think that as African Americans we had endured more hardships is not the correct word, but a lot of challenges. And so we weren't afraid of challenges. We knew that people would not go along with you, but like I said, if it was the right decision, it was a strong decision, and I felt that the members of the board did the right thing. Of course, being right, there's something I carry in my book. It says, sometimes, doing the right things don't mean that people are going to be good to you, but you just have to do the right thing. So I felt no consternation. I felt no bad feelings about a decision because, I prayed over it, and I feel that certainly I am a Christian. A lot of people don't like you for you to say that. And I do believe in doing the right thing, and I think that that's what happened. So I think that the decisions made by that board has sustained itself over the years because the decisions proved to be the right thing. And superintendents, by the way, just last 2 to 3 years, and I keep up with many of them. And even though I was not on the board when, the succession of Zellinger and the succession of the next person, they endure the same type of problems. There's just different people making the decisions that they feel, some of them good, some of them bad, some of them indifferent. But I feel that we are living in such perilous times, and the decisions and the people that are elected, of course, I think that the people get what they elect, what they voted for, and that's the proof in the pudding.
Okay. Tell me this. Who was your favorite superintendent and why?
Ron McWhirter.
Really?
Well, and there's a reason for that.
Okay.
Because as a teacher coordinator, Ron McWhirter was the superintendent of the schools when I was an upcomer. I've always liked him because he was fair. And I remember a lot of times I was quite defiant. And I remember speaking to Ron, and Tom Carrio was my second one.
Right.
And he was my boss all the way through. But I was not a difficult employee, but maybe a bit non-compliant. And I remember once when I said to them, they would tell us things to do as supervisor. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
I said, I'd rather be an elementary school teacher in Berkeley County, take stuff like that. They said, well, you might just well be. And so years later, when I was on the board or maybe a principal or whatever, and I would say to them, why did you take all that stuff off me? They said, because we knew you had potential. So it's very easy. That's the easiest question that you ask. And, of course, Ron McWhirter and Tom Carrio. Now, everybody have their choices, but they certainly were mine.
What do you think of the current superintendent, Dr. Nancy McGill?
Do not know her.
Okay.
I've heard that she good, that she knows her own mind, and so I would be saying things about persons that I read in the newspaper without having any direct contact. So anything that I say would be superficial.
Okay.
I have a feeling that if she stays here long enough, I would probably, get involved. But I have been determined, not to delve into things that I don't have firsthand knowledge of. And, of course, I wish her well, and I read comments about her in the paper. But maybe next time we have an interview, I will have more concrete information that I would be able to make a statement based on validity, legitimacy, and solid information.
Do you think the Charleston County School District is heading into the right direction?
The answer is no. Like I said, you have a lot of people there who are there for the wrong reasons, in my opinion. And I, like most people, was appalled by board members wanting a 244% increase. Many of us knew that when we ran for the board that there was no pay involved. And I think that my answer to that question would be simply, and maybe I'm unfair by basing it on one question, but during the bad economy, when you would have elected officials who would want to be self-serving, I feel that if I felt that board members should receive an increase in pay, then I think that you vote for those things that you are not going to be benefited by. So if they wanted to vote for it before, after they left, so that others, then I'd feel much more. But then I see the inferences of the charter school. Then I've heard that there are a lot of people wanted to take, and of course, take cursive writing out of the schools, and so that most students would depend on computers. So based on those three areas alone would probably nullify any confidence I would have in that group. And having been an educator and in the school for 30 years and 8 years on the board, so I think that gives me a tiny bit of information to not pass judgment, but just to voice my opinion.
If you were on the Charleston County School Board today, what would you do differently?
Well, as a matter of fact, I would certainly make sure that the sound educational principles are adhered to. And like I said earlier, and I thought very carefully about it, if you're not an educator, how can you make sound educational decisions? And yes, there have been a lot of lawyers on the board. Many people are in real estate, and of course that's fine. Usually on real estate boards or on hospital boards, most of them are doctors. So I would feel that I would probably fight to make sure that even if though they are not educators, that they would be able to make sound educational decisions when you find that the reading scores are down, or when you find that all of the areas, of course, everybody believes in zero tolerance and all of these things. But I would fight for more sound educational policies that would be based on fact, not happens around the country, but based on the areas here, and probably lobby the legislators like we did to make sure that even though we are not, make the laws, because the legislative delegation, they make the appointments, they do this and they do that. So I would be more of a rally for sound educational decisions and not put my own personal needs in front of the children. Nobody thinks about the children. They are simply being passed on to many areas. There are a lot of policies that are passed that are based on politics. And I know all politics is local, but sometimes you have to get about political views, being politically correct, and making the best decision for the children involved, the 43,000 or whatever children that we have in the Charleston County Schools. And one last thing I'd like to say, that even though people talk about charter schools, everybody know I'm not a charter school proponent because I feel that we have the public schools and you put all of the other areas into these areas. And I remember reading in the paper the other day when charter school people get involved in the political process. As a school person, we weren't allowed to do that. So you find, and as one person said, if there were non-charter public schools making these decisions, then there will be a rally or an outcry. Everybody wants their children to go to the best schools, but I feel that an organization is as strong as its weakest link. So as long as you have weak public schools, which is the cornerstone of American society, then you will have the same problems that we see recurring every day in our schools.
Well, I know that you and Diane Agapor take lots of walks around town together. What has been the secret to your great friendship?
Everybody knows that I keep no secrets, and it's ironic that Diane and I were political adversaries on the board. We came on the board at the time when it was 8-1. I was the one. And Diane used to vote with majority, by the way, until she actually listened to what I was saying. And even in meetings when the rest of them were against me, Diane said, well, Liz is right. Liz is right. And I think once we went to an affair, and it was Ron McWhort says that after the affair, it was, everybody knows I'm black, that's no secret, and it was a predominantly white affair, and they said we were the topic of conversation 30 minutes after we left. So we decided we're going to be the topic of conversation from here on, and maybe that's the reason, but I feel that even though I may be outspoken, I'm really what you call a conservative, and Diane is more liberal than I. And so we get into a lot of discussions that I win because I will do my homework. And I'll tell you this, if Diane's watching this, she'll be falling on the floor. I like to make statements, but they are statements that are based on research. And one statement that I make, I said, life is no crystal stair. So Diane said, I don't know what that means. And I said, well, life is no crystal stair. Crystal, you know what crystal means, you know what a stair is.
Sure.
And I said, well, I guess what, I'll Google it for you so that you can understand that it's not some colloquial saying that comes from rural black America. That Google it.
Yes.
So we Googled it, and I knew where it came from. It's a poem in many poets' areas. And I think in one of Langston Hughes' poems, Mother to Son, that is exactly where that came from. So I would tell her that when I make a statement, it is legitimate. So I have to re-educate you on many of these areas. And so I think that common respect is one thing that maintains a friendship that is based on mutual respect and like. And I found out that she really is anti-humanitarianism. She doesn't say things. And a lot of people wonder about a friendship that has sustained itself for about 12 to 14 years. And we, like the same things. You talk about walking. I think we walked this past Saturday. So we walk all over town, and people will say, who's that girl that you're walking with? Or who's, I hate to use the term black girl because I'm not a black girl. And she's not a white girl either. Who's that white girl U.S.? That's Diane Agaford.
Right.
Liz Alston.
Right.
And we just happen to be friends.
Yes.
And happen to be of different races. But that is not a criteria for friendship. But as I said, those are the areas. And it's based on the fact that we have been together so long, so now we have less to argue about because our views have simply meshed.
Yeah.
Now, that I cannot account for.
Yeah.
Maybe the Lord can.
Sure, okay. Well, let's go back into the days when you taught history at Barnes Wilson and Shakora High Schools. What were those days like?
Oh, my God, you have done your research, haven't you?
I tried.
As a matter of fact, yes. I even went to the Post and Courier, and I was surprised that they had printed all of those things.
Yes.
And I was always, a good teacher. Yes, I was a good teacher. I see my students now, and they treated me the same way that they treated, with a great deal of respect that's lost. And at Barnes Wilson, I taught history. And I remember, you're bringing back such nice memories. I would say, where did the Civil War begin? And they said, I don't know, in Charleston. I said, well, this is Charleston, North Charleston. Right. So I would take them on tours of Fort Sumter and pointing out at 134 Meeting Street where the Ordinance of Succession was signed. Right. And they liked history in spite of themselves. And so I like to call names, and then they needed somebody to do a TV program. Sure. And Lonnie Hamilton was the one that recommended me. So every Monday I'd be running across the Channel 4 talking about history. Sure. And then when they needed a history course, I taught the first black history course in Charleston County. And so then I started dealing with black history. And then when the Division of Curriculum and Instruction wanted someone to write the ethnic history of South Carolina, and then I was chosen to be its coordinator. And that was probably another best part of my life when I went to 33 school districts in the state of South Carolina to implement this history program. And as I go around the state today, people still remember me because my husband would sometimes get on the bus with me. Albert would go with me, and I said I had to go to Greenfield or I have to go this place, and he'd get on ride with me on the bus. Sure. No, we would drive, and then I would drive back, and he would take the bus back home. Wow. And then as I became more sophisticated, I would talk my bosses and say, well, if I have to go to someplace like Chester, South Carolina, and being a person, then I said, well, why should I drive all night, spend money to stay in Holiday Inn, that you could pay my airfare, and I'd take 15 minutes and fly to Charlotte, rent a car, and then be back at the end of the day, and also being conservative with funds. Sure. And so when I would go to them with my ideas, it was backed by fact with economic sense. And so I was able to do that, and so I liked that part about it. And ironically, when I was later placed on boards and commissions around the state, I ran into some of these same people. Wow. So my life has been a kind of a coordination of things, and all of the things have been interrelated. And to this day, my activities are still centered around history, African American history, tourism, education, and they all have the common bond. And a lot of people realize that I work very hard at achieving those things. So that has been, and so you brought back such nice memories of Shakora High School,
Yes.
and Barnes-Wilson High School. And when we go to class reunions, my friend Doris Coxum and I simply awe our students because they say we haven't changed. But that's because we get up at 6 in the morning, like I did today at 5,
Yeah.
and was at the spa till 6 to 7,
Wow.
and that's a daily routine.
Yeah. Now, you were a principal,
Yes.
a teacher, a school board member, and a chairwoman. Which position was the best and why?
I think that they all just, the fact that they led up to each of the others, and I think that the greatest part was the teacher.
Yes.
And because even my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, I was always walking around with books. So I knew I wanted to be a teacher since I was 6 years old. And even when I became a principal, many of my colleagues who were also classmates remembered that. So I would say all of those were great. You know, being chairwoman was great.
Yeah.
You know, being a principal, no, principal, worst job I ever had. Worst job I ever had. But I'm not saying that because of students, because
Sure.
but it was the parents.
Yes. Yeah.
Parents, you are awful. Parents are awful people because my child doesn't do this, my child doesn't do that. Parents, get your acts together. Because when I was a high school principal, and I've said this a lot, people,
Sure.
and I'm standing up speaking, I would go to a school and I was principal, you have to get along with my child. How in the devil could I have to get along with your child? And I have gone to school all my professional life. And I have, had to be prepared to be certified to become a principal.
Yes.
And that they want the parents to run the school. I don't think parents want to run the school, go get your degree. Those of us who are trained, now I'm saying there are some bad principals, but I knew I was a good principal, and I think my record has sustained itself. But the worst job I've had was that of a high school principal.
Wow.
Because not the students were great, I hugged them all along,
Yeah.
but it's the parents who wanted to interfere into the educational process. Now, if a principal is bad, then, get the root. Not you run the school, but then get rid of the principal if the principal isn't good. I was good and they got rid of me, so get rid of the rest of them. But I'm just saying, since you asked that, and I've said this in uncertain terms, and I'm not afraid of anybody, so I can say what I want to say. And so that's probably it. But like I said, work with your principals and work with the people that you choose to lead your school.
Sure. Then
if they are not up to par, then get rid of them. And, but there's a process. And sometimes all of us want instant gratification. So it can't be done overnight. So work with them. And I'm one of these people that says, well, and if I'm wrong, and I think even my adversaries will say, at least she's fair. I've heard that a lot. Or at least she'll back down. Now, I'm not going to stand out in the rain and get wet. If I'm wrong, then if you say, I will say I'm wrong,
Yeah.
and then I will try to do better.
Sure.
I'm not like, it's not my way or the highway.
Okay.
A lot of people say that, but it's not true.
Okay.
That I will listen to reason, and I was taught right from wrong. And believe me, everybody knows when they're wrong and when they're right. And I know when I'm wrong. When you see me say, okay, and I know I'm wrong, and then I'll do a bit better.
Yeah.
At least I will try to do better.
Okay. Well, listen, you got a lot of attention when you went to New York City during the summer of your college years. Tell me about that.
Oh, that was interesting. Those of us who grew up in the South, at least during my era, that we had adults that looked out for us.
Sure.
And I had one uncle, and his name was Uncle Isaac Simmons. And he was an older gentleman, but he was very nice to me. And I was always, like the old folks say, forward, always adventurous. And it's always very pretty and very stylish, and would get jobs in fashion designing. And, people would say, I don't like this, but they really did. So I would go to New York City and get top jobs. I worked at Bloomingdale's and Macy's.
Wow.
They even had my picture in the window. I still have the picture. It used to be in the newspaper every once in a while.
Yeah.
And then I met a lot of people. At that time,
Sure.
there were people like Brooke Benton who lived in my uncle's buildings. And he was very protective, didn't want me to be around with a lot of show people. And then it kind of sustained itself. And even now, I have a nephew that's famous, was famous, will be famous again. And so I have a chance to, interact with all kinds of people. And Wesley Snipes is no exception.
Well, let me ask you, who gave you the nickname Long Tall Lizzie?
Oh, my goodness. You really have done your research. Well, I've always been tall.
Sure.
And I think it was, but people in the streets used to say that. And I used to be going to work in New York City from down at 34th Street, and I would always walk with my head high. And people said, Long Tall Lizzie. And I remember once I was in New York City going to visit one of my mother's first cousins.
Yes.
And as I passed her, she was saying, oh, what a nice-looking young lady. She said they don't make them like that anymore. And when she came to her apartment, she found out that I was waiting for her. So I think that term with persons who name Lizzie, and if your legs were long, they call you long-leg Lizzie.
Oh.
That's just my version.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the right one.
Okay.
Just mine.
Well, listen, I found out that you had aspirations of being a lawyer.
Yeah.
Even a movie star.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. I am a frustrated lawyer.
Okay.
Yeah, because even on the board, if you go back through the files, there were times, and Miss Agapore was one of them, that I would always do my homework. And I remember by always voicing my opinion very, very, very articulately or whatever. And they were saying, well, Liz, what lawyer did you get that from? And I say, Johnny Cochran. And so, yes, if I were to come and go again, a lawyer and an actress would be high on the list, with an educator still being in the forefront. But and I think I made the right decision.
Speaking of movies, as you mentioned earlier, you have a well-known family member, Wesley Snipes.
Yes. When
you think of him, what comes to mind?
Well, sometimes I think of unfairness, because I felt that what has happened to him and still is happening to him is being unfair. I feel that even though a lot of persons said that he was guilty of tax evasion, but the public didn't know that he has paid back $15 million, and they still locked him up. And I think that if it were not for the color of his skin, he would not have been sentenced to 3 years in prison. But we're fighting to get him out.
Well, I'm curious to know this. What is your favorite Wesley Snipes movie?
Oh, there are so many of them. Okay. I think the one that I was most scared of was Blade.
Oh, really?
but I watched it hiding my face in my husband's shoulder. But so many of them I like. I like 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I like that one.
Yeah.
I like that.
Well, let me tell you, what's been the secret to your successful marriage to your husband, Al?
Well, I think it's me, because I'm tolerant. Now, he's always been very supportive of me.
Yes.
We've been married about 40 years, and he supports the area. And a lot of people, just like, as I said, he was featured in yesterday's paper for the House of the Future, which is on the corner of Reed and America Streets. And a lot of persons said at once, they said, well, we thought you were the historian, but Al is also interested in history. And I think the fact that our interests are similar, he's an artist, he did an artist painting that was featured. He did the House of the Future, and while I do the history, and he has an artistic touch. And so even though they say opposite attracts, but I found out that the older that we have gotten, that we are more compatible now than we thought we were some 4 decades ago.
Well, I know you and I talked about this previously, but he likes a lot of antiques. He likes collecting a lot of antiques. Why?
I think that maybe because when he went to college, he majored in industrial art,
Okay.
and it's like I say, most of the furniture in here have been reproduced,
Okay.
and they're antiques that has been not reproduced, restored.
Okay.
And it's because he picks out the pieces, and I simply have an historic interest, but his interest in history is just as deep as mine. And I feel that our parents, and I think I told him yesterday that I felt that our parents were, my mother, her name was Sadie, and his was Dot, and she was very close to me. A lot of people felt that even though Albert grew up in EmmanuelAME Church, and that's where I am a member, is that because of her, fostered the area, and so she has probably instilled into me some of the areas that he was interested in, and whether you call it brainwashing or whether you call love or whether you call what. And then she was very instrumental in my understanding her son. And I think if there's any one factor, that would be it.
Now, I know you joined EmmanuelAME Church back in 1972.
And like I said, part of it's because that was Albert's church.
Yeah.
And probably the foremost reason is because it's the oldest AME church south of the Mason-Dixon line, because it has this tremendous history. And for a long time, I served as a member of the History Archives Committee and was a member, or at least chairperson, of the trustee board at EmmanuelAME Church, because it is a church that is steeped in history. I love the church because of its history. And because it's certainly, and it kind of fits my feeling about a church of history. Not only does it provide spiritual uplifting, and at the same time, when people come to town or when I go away, I can talk about Emmanuel. I have slide presentations on the history of Emmanuel, and when it had its 165th anniversary, I went to the state Humanities Council, and we got a grant to study the history. And I remember a proud moment when we had theologians from around the country who would come to talk about the history. So yes, Emmanuel is a very, 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 very important part of my spiritual life.
Let's talk about the attic.
Oh, the attic.
I know you had a lot of important things in there. Let's say, for instance, if I was supposed to go in there now, what can I find in that attic?
You find everything in my attic.
Okay.
The first thing you will see are my Christmas gifts that I bought in December that's already wrapped, a couple of them on the area.
Yes.
And Ron McWhort used to talk about, and Diane Agapore used to talk about the fact that I make wine.
Oh.
And wine is in my attic because it gets very hot up there. And I did my research, and according to the IRS, I can manufacture 200 gallons a year before, but I only do about 6.
Okay.
And so in my attic are all my books, my seasonal off clothes. I go up there every day because and my husband has made another one over my bedroom.
Oh, cool.
Because he is a contractor.
Okay.
And so you find all of the books, and to a degree all of my files that I have kept, and sometimes all of my college memorabilia. Everything is in the attic. The attic is also, I don't think I'll ever live in a house without an attic. My sister used to say, well, my sister Alfreda lives in Ridgeville, and she has a garage, and I have an attic when we go to New York City. She said, well, you all have attics and garages. I have nothing but halls to put my stuff in. So my attic is really, it's a security blanket.
Yes.
I can pull down the stairs and escape to an attic because it's also a part of my psyche.
That was good to hear.
Yes.
Oh, describe to me the following one word: family.
Family is everything. Family is everything. My mother was a matriarch of our lives, and I think that even my colleagues would say my mother reared all of her siblings' children. So whether it's a retired policeman in New York City or a banker in Philadelphia or probably a governmental worker in Albany or my niece in California or my nephew who's in Orlando, or the other ones in Atlanta. They are the ones. And I think when my mother died in 2009, she loved pink. So at her funeral, everything was pink. It was so uplifting. And all of us had on the same suit. So my niece in New York, she used to work for Governor David Patterson.
Okay.
Or the one that worked for Wesley in L.A. We ended up with the same suit. So that shows you a sense of family.
Yes. Because
my mother has instilled in all of us the love for family. So even now when I go up to Jedburgh and if I were to misbehave and the kids would say to me, what would Grandma think? So they know right away that all you have to do is call her name and I will revert to that hard-headed 13-year-old that I am still in, that I will do the right thing.
Yes.
And so when she says, Liz, you are the head of the family, so I have to put aside my own ethnocentric feelings or my own idiosyncrasies and do the right thing for the family. Because without family, I certainly would not be where I think I am today, whatever that is.
Education, one word.
Education, I think, is accountability and responsibility. Everything else is secondary.
Charleston.
Oh, Charleston. Oh, Charleston is, I'd rather be lampposting Charleston than the mayor of any American city. Charleston is quaint. Charleston is ideal.
Yes.
Charleston is my home. I was born here, bred here, will die here.
New York City.
Oh, New York City runs second to Atlanta.
Oh, really?
But New York City is, I remember reading a book, was called The Chicken Bone Special, that says that, because people would travel up on the train and everybody would eat chicken. And so you're finding out that, and it's kind of ironic because most people from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia go to New York City. If people from Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, would migrate to Chicago or Detroit or many of these other areas. And so I've often done a lot of studies about the northern blacks and southern blacks, northern whites and southern whites. But because New York City really is the greatest city in the world, and I always thought that I would live there. But I think that my mother was very instrumental in that I would have a southern base. So therefore, even though I used to go to New York City often, but many of these people have moved, they have migrated south, so the circle has been turned around. So most of them are here. So even though when we used to run to New York City, now everybody is reclaiming their homeland. And I think that might be divine intervention.
Yes.
I don't know, but it might be. But New York City still holds a place in my heart.
One word to describe Liz Alston.
I would say true to self, self-identity, dedicated. I feel that responsible, and I've thought about that before too, but and lately another word has creeped into my vocabulary, and that's humility.
That is awesome.
Yes, I feel that returning to your roots, and I spend enough time alone to reassess myself, and I'm thinking that even though dependability, accountability, love, family, humility.
One last question. When you look into your crystal ball, what do you see in your future?
Well, I see in my future probably some recurrences of my past.
Okay.
And that means that return to the love of education, and it's to make sure that I continue to do things that not will benefit me, but benefit humanity, is to help someone along the way. And so I don't want anything for myself. It's only to help those that come behind me. That, I feel, should be my legacy.